Hey folks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor, and these are my 10 favourite books that I read in 2017, 9 of which are physical. But yeah, when I say favourite books of 2017, I didn't necessarily originally rate all of these 5 stars. In fact, there are definitely things I rated 5 stars that are not on this pile. This is more books that I can rave about, books that I just made me feel happy, books that made me feel, and that I can talk about forever, and that I am, to be honest, books that I am liable to reread. I can see myself rereading these over and over and over again. And that's for me what my favourite books are. Maybe not always the highest rated, maybe not always the best written. All of these are all written really, really well. But they made me feel, and I feel like I could read them and reread them all the time. So, they're probably, a lot of them are probably future comfort reads. Some make me think, some are just fun romps. But yeah, these are sort of a bit of a random, in no particular order, 10 favourite books of 2017. So, like I said, no particular order. I'm just going to start at the top with the one ebook that I've included. There are a number of ebooks that I probably could have included, but I went with Girl Reporter by Tansy Radin Roberts, which came out in December. This is the 3rd story in the Cookie Cutter superhero universe, and it's the story of Friday Valentina, the daughter of Tina Valentina, who was the first reporter to get a full-on interview with a superhero, and now she's gone missing, and her daughter is like a YouTuber and a sort of new media reporter following in her footsteps but doing it her own way, and she's awesome, and it's a fun romp, and I can see myself rereading that a lot because I really liked Friday Valentina. I really did, but I've mentioned that in a couple of videos recently, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. Next on my list is Newt's Emerald by Garth Nix. So this is a YA book. It's Regency, it's magical, it's a mystery, and yeah, it's got a female protagonist. So right up my alley. So basically it's the story of Lady Truthful Newington, who is going to inherit, she's her father's only heir, and she's going to inherit the Newington Emerald, but it's stolen. And so Newt runs off to visit her, I think it's her aunt, in London, or a friend in London. And she investigates, tries to figure out where this famous jewel that belongs to her family, this magical jewel that belongs to her family, has gone, who's taken it, what's going on. And so she disguises herself as a boy in order to do the investigating, because of course in Regency England, girls can't investigate. So she disguises herself as a boy and gets into all sorts of hijinks. And this is what I love. This is all the things I love, and it actually worked for me, and it was fun, and I read it really quickly. It's the first Garth Nix that I've ever read, but it was an amazing experience, and I can definitely, I think, reread this a lot. So yeah, that's Newt's Emerald by Garth Nix. Next up is one that is perhaps less joyful but poignant, given that we've just lost the author this week, and that is Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. This is my first Ursula Le Guin that I finally got around to reading this year, and it's one of her most favourite novels, and it made me think so much, and I can see myself rereading it because there is so much in there, and I probably didn't catch all the subtleties, and it made me think so much that I'm like, I need to read this again, and so I will read this again. And so this is one of the, this is a story of an Earth-like planet with a species of humans who don't have gender. They only take on a gender during their heat period, and they can be either gender. And during their heat period, then they will mate and have children, but then they go back to being non-gendered. And so this is from this perspective mostly of an observer sent from other human planets to observe this particular species of human. and the way that they interact. And so there's a lot in there about gender, there's a lot in there about political systems, and religion, and all sorts of really interesting things. So I can definitely see myself reading this again and again and just getting more and more out of it. So this was a really good read this year. Okay, I only picked one of these, but this year I started reading, pretty sure I started reading this year, Lumberjanes by Noelle Stevenson, which is a series of comics. So this is volume 1, but I read I think I read 3 volumes this year, unless I read this volume last year. I actually can't remember off the top of my head, but Lumberjanes, I just fell in love with Lumberjanes. So this is basically representing all of the 3 volumes of Lumberjanes that I've read. This is a comic, graphic novel about a group of female friends who are at camp together, and they keep getting into sort of supernatural trouble by accident. But it's teaching lessons about friendship and about relying on each other and about being intelligent and doing your best. And it's a diverse cast because although they're all girls, they're all very different. There's a lesbian relationship that happens sort of in the 3rd volume, I think. And it's just really awesome. And it's a joy, honestly a joy to read every time I pick up a volume. So I'm really looking forward to continuing with the Lumberjanes. Okay, this is one that I read near the start of the year and it meant a lot to me. And it's My People by Ujuru. It's a collection of poetry. Now, Ujuru, who was also, I think, known as Kath Walker, yes, Kath Walker, was her English name, but Ujuru is the name she was given from her people. She was an Indigenous poet in the 20th century in Australia, and her work is amazing. It's very blunt. It's not necessarily elegant lyrical poetry, but it's poetry that has a lot to say, and it's plain language, but every word you can tell is chosen specifically to make a point, to make an impact. And this meant so much to me. I actually did a whole video about this poetry collection, which you can find on my channel. But yeah, My People by Ujuru, if you read any book of Australian poetry, read this one. Read Ujuru's work. It's amazing. And even though she was writing in like the 60s and 70s, it is so relevant to today's Australia. So relevant it hurts. But it's definitely worth a read. Like, seriously, if you're going to read Australian poetry, read Ujuru. Now, here we come to the book where I have not had a reaction to a book like this since the very first time I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen when I was 11. This is The Women in Black by Madeline St. John. I read it 3 times in 2 weeks. 3 times in 2 weeks. Because I loved it so much. I did have the advantage in that I actually saw the musical first. Tim Finn has written a musical here in Australia of this called Ladies in Black, and I went and I saw that, and it was the best theatre experience I've had in a long time. It was amazing, it was funny, it was moving, and it's all about women. And so I decided to pick up the book this year as well, and I loved it. I read it all in one evening. It's just beautiful and warm and witty, and it feels like Jane Austen, but it's set in 1960 in Sydney. And it's about a girl called Leslie who wants to be called Lisa, who's just sat her final exams and is waiting to see if she's qualifying for university, which her father doesn't want her to go to. And she gets a job in the department store goods over the Christmas New Year period, and she starts working in ladies' cocktail gowns. And this is just a book about the women that work in cocktail gowns and model gowns in this department store over this 6-week period, and the various things that happen to the different women. They just live their lives, and it's beautiful. It's warm. I just fell in love with all of them. Like, they're amazing. It's an amazing book. maybe maybe I love it so much because I've seen the musical, because I gave it to my mother for Christmas and she enjoyed it, but she didn't rave about it. So maybe the fact that I have the characterizations in my head from the stage show helps, but I still really recommend it. I still think it's an amazing book. I really, really, really do. And it's just ordinary Australian women in 1960 living their lives, going to work, going home, their relationships with their families and with their friends and each other. And I just love it. I just really, really love it. It's probably my favourite book of the year, just because that's how the fact that I reacted to it I read it in a night, and then I bought the audiobook and I listened to that twice the next week. And it's just, yeah. Women in Black by Madeline St. John. Pick it up. Pick it up. Okay, the next two books, and I had to put them both in, also have a great deal of meaning for me, particularly the first one, and they are Every Heart a Doorway and Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Sheldon Maguire. So these are the first two books in the Home for Wayward Children series. And I've also just recently read the third book, but these are so good. They're novellas, they're Tor.com novellas. And anyway, Every Heart a Doorway, it is so important to me. So important. I read it, it is beautiful, it's fairy tale-ish, it's a story of a home for children who have gone away to fairyland through a portal and then come home. And they want to go back to the world where they really belong. But their parents don't understand. Their parents don't believe them. And so they send them to Miss Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children. And there's a mystery in this. And there are some amazing, amazing characters in such a short book. You know, so many amazing characters. A wonderful murder mystery. And the protagonist? The protagonist taught me who I am, because the protagonist is asexual and she describes asexuality. And I read this book and then it twigged that explains so much about my history, so much about how I react to things. I kind of knew what asexuality was as a concept, but I'd never just seen it described in such a way. And, you know, it made me realise who I am. And I will be forever grateful for this book, for explaining who I am. And that's one of the reasons I love this series so much. But I also love it because it's fairy tales and portal fantasy, which I love. And it's so beautifully written. And it's so diverse in its characters. It's amazing. So that's Every Heart a Doorway. And then the second one, which I actually have signed because I went to the book launch in Melbourne, is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. And it's a prequel. And it's about two of the characters in Every Heart a Doorway and how they eventually got to their original other world and why they had to leave it. And it's also about bad parenting, and it's about children being forced into identities that don't fit them, and what happens when they're finally given the opportunity to try on the identity that they want, and that it can go well and that it can go badly. So this is basically a portal fantasy. They go through a trunk and down a set of stairs and they come out in the moors, and it's dark and it's heartbreaking, but it's really, really good. So that's Down Among the Sticks and Bones. Then I picked up The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. I'd read one of the stories in this before for a uni subject, and so I've been hoping to get a hold of it, and I finally did. So this is a collection of short stories. It's a very famous collection of short stories. They are retellings of fairy tales. although retellings is not really the word. They're rewrites, they're very feminist, they're very dark, they're very bloody, they're very uncomfortable, but they're so good. They are so good. Really good. So probably the best collection of stories that I read this year. It's very famous, but it's also deservedly so. It's really, really good. So really recommend The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter for anyone who loves fairy tales. And then I come to the final one on my list, and that's Bejeweled by Angela Slater, sorry. So this is an Australian book. It's the first book in the Verity Fassbinder series. It's urban fantasy and it's set in Brisbane. And it's about Verity, who is half human, half weird. And she's she straddles that line between the two communities. And so she's used as a bit of a fixer by the Weird Council in order she investigates stuff that might impinge on the normal world, and therefore might reveal the weird, which they don't want. And there are so many different storylines in this and so many different mysteries, but they all somehow tie back together. And it's so good. I read this in like 2 nights and it was so much fun. It's a bit dark. Like a lot of horrible stuff happens, but it's really, really good. It's some of the best urban fantasy I've read in a long time. And it's Australian. It's very Australian, but I think it's very Australian without being uncomfortable for people who aren't Australian. So yeah, Vigil. It's really, really good, and I've just finished the second book, Corpse Light, so I'm really looking forward to the third book. But yeah, this was definitely one of my favourite books of last year. I really, really loved it, and I can see myself rereading it over and over again. Yeah, so those are my 10 favourite books of 2017. Let me know if you've read any of them. I'd like to hear what you think of any of those. Or if you have any questions about any of them, let me know. Let me know what your favourite books from last year were. But yeah, so that was my favourite books of 2017. Just to let you know, my posting schedule might be still a bit weird for the next week or so. I had meant to post this on the weekend and forgot to film it. So I'm posting it hopefully soon. But I'm also having wisdom tooth surgery on Friday. So I'm not sure I'm going to be up to posting or recording videos on the weekend or even into next week. So you might have to wait a bit for the first video of February. But yeah, I hope you're reading really well. And I will see you all again soon. Bye.